So why this is happening now, I don't know. But I can tell you that if you don't use what I would call a class analysis, then the analysis it's going to be giving you is the analysis that comes through the lens of the ruling class, which owns, you didn't know this was ruling class, the lens of the ruling class. One of the reasons I read the foreign press is to find out things that's just not reported in the American press. Not that the British press doesn't come with its own set of biases. Thank you. But one of the things that's lacking in the media, and remember the media consists of large corporations owned by the class that has the money to own them, and the job of the media is to make money selling advertising, and they sell the advertising to other businesses, that is, other members of the capitalist class. So when the media reports on the news, the media, is essentially the media of the ruling class. So you always have to read it with, to use another cliche, a grain of salt. You have to realize that I'm getting the news framed the way the ruling class wants to frame it. And so there's a twist to it. So you have to learn how to decode things. You have to learn to ask yourself, if the media is talking about the youth uprising, and they don't say anything about the workers, then you have to be smart enough, savvy enough to ask yourself, where are the workers? I mean, from some media reports, you wouldn't think Egypt has any workers. They just have a bunch of frustrated young people. Got a university degree in chemical engineering and just couldn't find a job. Little joke there, so don't take it wrong. They probably should have told you I come up with bizarre sense of humor. Anyway, so you have to learn to read the media. And I would suggest, and I didn't write these, I have them at home, I didn't bring them with me. The Stanford professor, Joel Bainin, who studies the Egyptian labor movement, he says there's plenty of resources on the internet. You can read about the Egyptian labor movement. There's plenty of good blogs. He gave me some names. Unfortunately, I didn't do my homework 100%. I apologize. I can always send an email. Okay, check this out. You can forward it, to each other. But one of the things for you to pay attention to is what are the working classes doing? Let me say something about the outcomes. A lot of people are very hopeful, like maybe there's going to be substantial change in Egypt and Libya and Tunisia. I hope you're right. But I'm not that optimistic. I'm not that optimistic because the ruling classes have, over the last 30 years, succeeded in tremendously disorganizing the working classes. And they do their best to destroy what we call class consciousness. I say we, Fernando and myself. At least I know there's two of us that will talk about class consciousness. There's an old saying that the class that controls the means of material production controls the means of mental production. And the ruling classes, through their school systems, through their media, make a big effort to get you to think of yourself in all kinds of terms but class. Think of yourself in terms of your occupation or profession. Think of yourself in terms of your gender, your sex. Think of yourself in terms of your religious faith, or in terms of nationality or ethnicity. Think of yourself in any terms but class. And if you don't think in terms of class, you won't have the basis for seeing what kinds of problems you have in common. And then for those of you who see through the ideological manipulation and say, well, there is something that we could call a class struggle going on. And the primary question is, could we collectively run society to meet all our needs? Which, by the way, is a question it's generally kept out of the school curriculum. Go take econ, policy, go take sociology, my field. The question is almost never asked. Could we, the producers, the workers, can we collectively run society to satisfy all our needs? The modern production system known as capitalism has this capacity to feed everybody, to house everybody, to provide medical care for everybody, schooling for it. The capacity is there, but it never gets delivered. And one of the reasons it doesn't get delivered is those people who do the work, who produce, don't have any rights to make the investment decisions. Investment decisions are left in the hands of those who own the factories, the 2% that owns 44% of the farmland in Pakistan, etc., etc. Those people, the minority, decide what gets produced, and it's for profit. It's not for human need. So this is a very fundamental question, but if it's not put out in a systematic way so that you don't address it, you don't think about it. Another thing that happens is when workers do actually produce on their own and take some kind of control of the means of production, that's not discussed either. Some of you who've had my classes might recall that I do make an effort to bring to students' attention, not in every course, but in a few of them, the fact that as I speak right now, at the other end of the Western Hemisphere, in the country of Argentina, which underwent a financial and economic collapse, much like ours, in a few years preceding our collapse, factories were closed down. The workers were laid off. Some of the workers, beginning with the women in the garment industry, looked at the factories and thought to themselves, wait a minute, the materials are in there. The machines are in there. The only thing that's not in there is us. Let's get some bolt cutters, cut the locks off the gates, and let's go in. We'll go in and we'll start production, which is exactly what they did. Of course, once the men saw the women do it, it's like, well, you can do it, we can do it. Guys are kind of like that. So, you have now in Argentina what is called the Recovered Factory Movement. Recovered Factory Movement. There's even books written about it. Not many. There should be a dissertation or two written about it, but anyway. I tell my students this recovered factory movement has been going on for at least 8 years now. How is it you had all those AP classes before you got here, then you have all these fancy schmancy classes here, international studies, political science, economics, and when I ask you, tell me about the recovered factory movement, you look at me like, huh? I mean, this is the country of what? 500 news channels, 24/7? That's like okay? You have all this news coming in, how is it that somehow that gets filtered out? It doesn't fit the class interests of those who run the media. By the way, this is not a conspiracy argument. It's a class argument. The class that controls the means of production has it in their class interest to represent reality in ways that favor its position and power. And there are some things you're just not going to be told. You're not going to be told about a very vibrant labor movement in Egypt that goes back pre-World War II. It's just not there. You're not going to be told about workers in Argentina running empty factories in the recovered factory movement, proving that you can have an economy run sin chrome without bosses. They're not going to tell you about the women in Bangladesh protesting to such an extent that the army comes out. Not the cops, the army. That's just not going to be reported, because those kinds of things are the kinds of things that might make you think, oh, workers. And remember, we're talking, in the case of these are factory workers. They're almost all without college educations. They don't have your fancy schmancy educations. And yet they're pretty savvy and they're pretty bright. And they know how to organize, and they know how to deal with the secret police, and they know how to advance their cause. They're continually beaten back. You know, there's a struggle, pushed back and forth. But if you look at the working class movement around the world, from the United States to Tunisia, from Egypt to Bangladesh, from Russia to Argentina, you know, from Syria to Israel, from Yemen to South Africa is actually pretty militant. It has been pushed back, and very, very much so that it's on a big defensive. It's quite unorganized. But let me give you some hopefulness. Your employers, the capitalists, have a way of stimulating class consciousness, because you will learn at work you don't count as a person. You are simply a cog in the machine. And the fact that you have a family to support, neither here nor there. The fact that you have worked hard for the company for 20 years, neither here nor there. You are just a cost of production. And if the cost of having you as a worker in the office, in the bureaucracy, in the factory, on the farm is too much, you're out. Your humanity, your need for sustenance, your family's need for that income doesn't count. And that kind of treatment stimulates class consciousness. And I would say that probably many of the people involved in these uprisings intuitively, if they don't explicitly have a class consciousness, they intuitively have it. And I do think that one of the things that holds those of you who say, I am either in the oppressed class or I'm standing with the oppressed class, one of the things that holds us back is sectarianism. And by sectarianism, I don't mean narrowly political differences, and I don't mean religious differences, I mean national differences. The bosses internationally all work together. One of the articles that you saw me pick up, and I said, oh, I think maybe I'll save this for later, and I put it down, you're wondering, well, what was that? It was about, oh, go find it, Professor, go find it. Oh, just, hang on, patience. Page 16 of the March 11th edition of the Guardian Weekly. Article at the bottom. You ever hear of the LSE? London School of Economics? You've heard of that. So, the headline on the article says, LSE head resigns over Gaddafi scandal. This gets me to think, London School of Economics, prestigious university. Like, what is he resigning? Gaddafi scandal? London School of Economics and Gaddafi?